Some towns banned it. Every trucker swore by it. One device loud enough to rattle windows and trigger ordinances across America was also the only thing keeping a loaded 18-wheeler from becoming a runaway on a 6% mountain grade. It all started in 1931 with a man named Clessie Cummins and a near-fatal slide down California's Cajon Pass. Clessie L. Cummins came out of Cajon Pass in 1931 with more than a story to tell. He had a problem to solve. That harrowing descent with the loaded diesel barely clinging to the rails stuck with him for decades. Cummins, already known for building engines that could run all day and all night, set out to find a way for trucks to hold back their own weight on the steepest American grades. His answer took shape over years of tinkering and test runs, but it was not until 1961 that the idea found a home on America's highways. The timing was right. Mountain carriers, those running the Rockies, the Sierras, the Appalachians, were desperate for something better than burning up service brakes on every descent. In 1962, Cummins filed a patent that spelled out the system, a way to turn a diesel engine into its own brake by opening the exhaust valve at just the right moment. As the technology spread, drivers started calling it by the brand they saw stamped on the hardware, Jake Brake. Soon, that name was as much a part of trucking as the smell of hot oil in a rest stop or the sound of AM radio after midnight. For the men and women behind the wheel, it was more than a machine. It was a lifeline, forged out of one man's close call and carried by every rig that dared a mountain road. A diesel engine, for all its power, doesn't slow a truck the way most folks expect. Unlike a gasoline engine, there is no throttle plate to choke off the air and create resistance when you lift your foot. Instead, the pistons keep right on pumping, compressing air on every upstroke, but nearly all that energy is handed right back to the crankshaft on the way down. The engine barely holds the rig back at all. That is where the compression release brake changes everything. The system works by opening the exhaust valve just before the piston reaches top dead center on the compression stroke. At that moment, the air inside the cylinder is squeezed to more than 30 bar. Instead of letting the piston push that compressed air back down and return the energy to the wheels, the Jake Brake lets it escape straight into the exhaust. The engine oil, already circulating under pressure, drives a hydraulic rocker arm that pops the valve open at exactly the right instant. The result is drag, real, heavy drag. On a 13-liter engine running at 1,300 revolutions per minute, the retarding force can reach about 2,000 Newton meters. That is enough to hold back a fully loaded tractor-trailer on a mountain grade without riding the service brakes to the brink of failure. For drivers, the difference is felt in the pedal and in the temperature gauge. With the Jake Brake engaged, wheel brake use drops by 30 to 50% on a long descent. The service brakes stay cool, ready for emergencies instead of glowing red from the strain. It is a simple valve event, but it turns the engine itself into a safety net, a mechanical hand holding the truck steady when gravity wants to take over. Out on the long grades of Interstate 70 in Colorado and the switchbacks of Donner Pass, the Jake Brake became more than an engineering trick. It was a badge of survival. Those mountain corridors did not just test a truck's horsepower, they measured a driver's nerve. On stretches where the road dropped away for miles, the sound of the Jake Brake meant a rig was under control, not at the mercy of gravity. Freight carriers running the Rockies and Sierras made engine braking standard equipment, and the practice quickly spread across the fleet. The numbers told their own story. Where drivers used the Jake Brake on steep grades, severe brake fade crashes dropped by as much as 30 or even 40%. That was not theory, it was logged in accident reports and written into company safety bulletins. Veteran drivers learned to trust the bark of the Jake Brake as proof they were doing the job right. On a 12% grade hauling 40 tons, the difference between a controlled descent and a runaway often came down to that sound echoing of the canyon walls. The device became a right for anyone hauling steel, produce, or machinery over the backbone of the country. It was the mark of a working truck, and the men and women who used it wore that identity with pride. In the cab, the noise was not a nuisance, it was assurance, a sign that the brakes would be cool and ready at the bottom, and that the cargo, the truck, and the driver would all make it home in one piece. The sound of the Jake brake wasn't just a background hum, it was a force that split towns in two. An unmuffled engine brake could hit 101.5 decibels at 50 feet, louder than a chainsaw, louder than a freight train at a crossing. For truckers, that roar meant control on a mountain grade. For folks living near the highway, it meant something else entirely. Night after night, the sharp report of compressed air rattled windows and cut through bedroom walls. Sleep became a rare commodity for families whose homes sat close to the main drag. Complaints started as grumbling at the diner or letters to the editor, but soon they landed in town hall meetings and city council records. Local governments found their leverage in the numbers, with EPA data showing 101 dBA from an unmuffled brake. They could point to public health studies and noise ordinances. The issue wasn't just annoyance, it was quality of life. Parents talked about children waking up in tears, retirees about blood pressure and restless nights. The conflict became official when the first no engine brake signs went up at the edge of town. In Ohio, Oregon, Colorado, and dozens of other states, ordinances gave teeth to these signs, setting decibel thresholds and fines. For the men behind the wheel, the sign meant a choice: keep the brake off and risk the hill, or risk a ticket and the anger of neighbors who didn't see the mountain the way a driver did. The split was clear. In the cab, the Jake brake was a safety device. On Main Street, it was an intrusion. Two Americas separated by a few inches of steel and 100 decibels of sound. The fight over the engine brake never wiped it from the road. In 1993, a federal court case, Jacobs Vehicle Equipment Company versus Pacific Diesel Brake, put the core design under a microscope. The ruling confirmed what drivers and mechanics already knew. The compression release brake was a legitimate safety tool, not just a noisy add-on. The courtroom didn't erase the Jake brake, it clarified what counted as real innovation and what was simply following in its tracks. Manufacturers took the hint. Instead of scrapping the brake, they set to work making it quieter. Mufflers grew more common and new models promised a softer footprint without losing the stopping power. The conversation moved from whether the device should exist to how it ought to sound, and how it was named in the law. Official documents started using the term compression release engine brake, drawing a line between the life-saving hardware and the racket it could make. The story became less about silencing the brake and more about shaping its place in the rules of the road. Restrictions on engine brakes didn't just change the sound outside, they changed the work inside. For the men in the cab, a muffled or forbidden Jake brake meant more than a quieter ride. Every time a town ordinance took away that bark, drivers had to lean harder on their service brakes. On a long grade, that meant more heat, more wear, and more worry. Mechanics started seeing the numbers add up. A set of brake drums ran between $326 and $371 just for parts, and labor could tack on another $83 to $122. It wasn't just the money, it was the time lost in the shop, the hassle of extra stops, and the nagging thought that a tool built for survival was now off limits where it was needed most. Engine brake service itself took about an hour and a half of a technician's time, often folded into a regular overhaul, but still another line on the bill. For old hands, the change was more than a ledger entry. The feel of a descent, the sound that told you the machine was working, the judgment it took to hold 40 tons back on a wet night, all of it started to fade. The job got quieter, but it lost something raw and real. Mechanical control gave way to procedures and electronics, and the old-timers felt the culture slipping away, one muted hill at a time. Across America, over 2,000 towns still post signs against engine brakes. Yet for the men who hauled steel and lumber through mountain passes, that noise meant survival. Today, quieter roads come with a cost. One less echo of the grit and know-how that built the country. Thanks for watching.